three major things in this section. First one, why do we think that the decline necessarily has to do with globalization? Why we think that this is a good trade-off? Secondly, I'm going to talk about identity and about conflicts, and then I'm going to talk about the corporations and how to regulate them, or should we regulate them that much. So let's start with the POI that we get that asks, well, what does the decline of power have to do? Look, this is a zero-sum game. We say that in a world before globalization, the nation state used to control everything. It had closed borders. It was the only one that could decide what company can get a license, what company can't, what are the exact rules. It would have hermetic control over the messages that people would have, considering that they didn't have information and access to different ideas coming from different countries. Globalization has changed that to the point where the government is no longer the only source where you can get money from, where you can meet new people from, where you can get ideas, and so on. And we see that in things like the European Union. We see that by the idea that you have a McDonald's pretty much everywhere in the world, and so on. So we think this necessarily has to be this trade-off, because if not, countries would simply push all of those factors away and would have remained closed historically. Then we get the attack on the identity. And we get from Amichay this analysis that says, look, there are way worse alternatives to identity, and all of the examples that he gives us has nothing to do with global. All of the identities that he suggests as alternatives are local. Religious is local. Being from a certain ethnicity is also something local, or at least something that is not a direct result of globalization, considering that we don't see massive new globalized networks that have not existed in the past, such as being a Catholic, which we don't think has to do with globalization per se, which have to do with those factors. Secondly, notice that the nation state is also exclusive, because Amichay simply asserts, based on one example that is the United States, that everyone can become a member of the nation state. But in most nation states, one cannot be unless he is born there, or unless he has certain ethnicity that correlates with that nation state. Meaning that there are many people that are minorities within their own countries that can never be accepted or cannot really move to a place where they are. So we don't accept that comparatively he is better. But also we say that when it comes to identity, we have offered a clear explanation. Here we're referring to the fact that people consume the same things. People meet each other much more, meaning that the identity that they have is one that they are more likely to choose for themselves based on their preferences. In a world where everyone has Apple products, I can relate to someone who has an Apple product just like me. Or I can relate to someone who I met on an online forum that shares the same hobby, something that I couldn't have done before globalization. Meaning that I'm more likely to find others like myself, not feel lonely, and to be a part of a community, or even move to a place where I find my identity to be more suitable. So we think that already on that, we win. But then there is the economical question, do we have more wars? So here Amichay tells us, well, but there is more power to the stronger state. And here, look, Russia can do things to the Ukraine. Notice that once again, this is something that happened even in the world before globalization, when you had strong superpowers like Russia, or when you simply had trades, or you had countries that would produce everything and didn't trade with others who didn't have the ability to produce as much or to gain on the fact that they had a certain economical advantage. What we say is that in our world, we may have not reached a perfect result in terms of solving all conflicts, but what we have is we have a sharing of many parts of the chain of production, meaning that in a world where you have a phone that has parts that come from one part of the world, that has workers from another part of the world, that has marketing from another country in the world, then you have more codependency between those countries, and you have more countries that have the ability to actually negotiate and reach an agreement and not feel that they have an interest to simply go on a war with one another, because they need each other much more in our world. So that's on that. Now, before I continue on to my next point,
political minorities are exactly the poorest and the weakest one in the countries, are the one who can't go globalize, who can't enjoy globalization, but are the one who being screwed because the local identities are against.
Those people didn't have a chance even before. What Menachem has told you is that now, at least, those who are good, meritocratically, have the ability to actually shine, have the ability to find a place that will accept them, irrespectively of the place they live in, just because they are more talented. Now we say, yes, it's bad to be poor, but we say that it's not moral either for that poor person to be from India, a country that had no functioning economy that one could have relied on before globalization, because it needed those big corporations from the West to come and to give them jobs and to help them more. So we say that on our world it's fair. Then we get to the idea of the corporations. And here Amichay tells us, well, corporations can decide on everything. Notice that once again he's not being comparative, because we say that nation states are really bad as well, and we say that there is much more room for abuse. Now it's funny that he mentions climate, because I wouldn't want to give Donald Trump exclusive control over climate in a world, or we say that there is a lot of corruption in countries, and often they look at small, minute interests. We say that it's really good to have the corporations to actually balance out the interest. And we say that while they are not always perfect, there are checks and balances on them when it comes to the extreme cases, as we've seen in the Paris Climate Committee, as we've seen in the European courts, taking Google and actually saying you didn't pay all of your taxes. So we're not talking about the fringe cases where they do it too much, but we say that in other forms of regulation and so on, it's really good to have them in charge, because they think about what gives additive value to the consumers globally, because their way of making money is not through regulation per se. It is through solving a problem to people and making people consume more of their product, unlike the products of others, meaning that they do not want a situation where there are tensions. They do not want a situation where there is no one to consume their own goods, meaning that they are an actor for good, and we don't want to prevent that good by a country that we don't know how to regulate that country.